My son-in-law tried to claim my new cabin as theirs, until my welcome broke them. After years dedicated to nursing and raising my daughter, I achieved what I always dreamed of. A quiet cabin in the mountains, all mine. It was my sanctuary, my piece of peace. But that peace was cruelly and unexpectedly threatened by someone who should have protected me, my son-in-law. Without asking, without consulting, he decided that my days of freedom were over. What he didn't know was that behind my serene appearance was a determined woman, with more strength than he ever imagined. What started as a simple visit turned into a battle for respect, dignity, and autonomy. Today, this story has completely transformed me. I'm glad to have you here. Follow along to the end and comment from which city you are watching so I can see how far my voice has reached. The scent of wood and damp earth enveloped me as soon as I opened the cabin door. The silence was alive, almost pulsating, broken only by the rustling of leaves and the whistle of the wind through the trees. I felt a wave of gratitude flow through my body, as if every fiber in me recognized that place as a promised home. My tired bones felt lighter there, as if time had finally stopped in respect for my story. I took a deep breath and allowed myself to smile alone, surrounded by trees and freedom. I settled in slowly, tracing my fingers over the raw wood of the countertop I had chosen myself. Everything there had been carefully thought out, from the blanket on the sofa to the curtains that let the light dance through the room. For the first time in decades, there were no voices to silence my thoughts, no obligations pushing me against the current. The sound of the wind mixed with my footsteps, and solitude was a blessing, not a punishment. I walked to the porch and let the cold gently touch my face. Outside, the green of the trees was deep, almost hypnotic. I watched the sky through the branches and saw myself small, but firm, like a seed finally cast into the right soil. I had left behind a life full of schedules, hospital corridors, and postponed promises. Here every minute was mine. Every choice too. Peace was not the absence of sound, but the absence of haste, of fear, of eyes expecting too much. When a deer emerged from among the trees and stared at me for a brief moment, I almost held my breath. That was a sign, a silent confirmation that I belonged there. Nature accepted me as one of its own. I brought the hot mug to my lips and closed my eyes for a moment. She watches a deer in the distance and thinks, finally, only the sound of nature. The phone rang, cutting the enchantment like an invisible blade. I hesitated before answering, already sensing that nothing good would come from that call. It was Ethan, my son-in-law, speaking fast as always with no time to listen. He said he had resolved something important and that I should be happy. His parents would come to live with me for a while they sorted out some issues. I felt my stomach clench like a forcefully slammed door. What do you mean, live here? I asked, trying to keep my voice steady though my throat burned. He continued, ignoring my question, saying it was temporary, that I would understand when I saw how good it would be for everyone. My heart began to pound faster, not from emotion but from alarm. It was as if someone had crossed the invisible fence of my peace without even asking permission. I had barely settled in. He talked about difficulties, about how his parents were tired of the city and needed something quieter. All said with that rehearsed tone he used to convince my daughter, but which never worked with me. I tried to argue, but he had already ended the conversation, as if my opinion was a mere detail. I stood there, the phone still glued to my ear, listening to the silence of the disconnected line. I've already arranged the move, Mom. They arrive Friday. I rushed to call Amanda, hoping at least to find some empathy in her. But her answer cut me with more coldness than the mountain air. It's only for a while, Mom. Help them. You have space. I tried to explain that this wasn't about space but about boundaries, about respect. She sighed, tired, as if I were exaggerating, as if wanting my solitude was selfish. I felt a weight on my back that hadn't visited me in a long time. I explained that this cabin was my sanctuary, my fresh start. But Amanda seemed more concerned with Ethan's pressure than with my peace. Every time I tried to resist, she diverted, minimized, changed the subject. It was as if my will was worth less now, as if my age had diminished my right to decide. With every word of hers, a crack opened between us. For the first time since I moved, I felt the ground move beneath my feet. The cabin, once a refuge, was now an invasion field. And the worst, armed by hands I loved. I sat on the sofa and held back my tears, determined not to let them fall. I wouldn't be defeated like this. Not now. But the solitude once cherished now hurt. If you don't like it, you can go back to the city. On Friday morning, the dirt road announced their arrival even before I could see them. Walter got out of the car first, carrying 2 enormous suitcases as if to show strength. Mabel emerged next, with a trembling smile and a lost look, trying to balance on shoes ill-suited for the terrain. I approached with a contained smile, not letting the growing discomfort show. They entered as if they owned everything. I made coffee and offered a tour of the cabin, trying to maintain cordiality. Mabel commented that it was rustic, as if it were a compliment. Walter looked at everything with calculating eyes, measuring the space like someone appraising an asset. My hands trembled slightly as I showed the rooms, already regretting having left the windows open, allowing the cold to enter and the scent of pine to spread. The cabin seemed smaller with them there, as if my freedom had been compressed. Walter said the place was simpler than he imagined, but that they would get used to it. We just need a few weeks to adapt, he added, as if I had asked for this. I swallowed hard, feeling anger creep through my veins. I didn't answer, just nodded, aware that any word of mine would be interpreted as hostility. I was still at an emotional disadvantage, and they knew it. That night I slept poorly. The creaking of the floorboards and Walter's snoring seemed to mock my attempt at peace. The house had changed its tone, as if it had lost its voice. We just need a few weeks to adapt. The first few days were a parade of veiled complaints. Mabel said the cistern water tasted like iron and that the sheets smelled of something stored away. Walter complained about the birds' noise at dawn and the cold that seeped through the walls at night. I watched everything in silence, trying not to explode. This wasn't the life I chose. It was an imposition disguised as kindness. On the 3rd day, Walter asked if I didn't have a television. I explained that I preferred the sounds of nature, that I found peace in reading and silence. He frowned as if I were a broken piece. Mabel commented that there was no central heating and that this could be bad for one's health. I took a deep breath, trying not to laugh at the absurdity. It was as if they expected to find a boutique hotel in the middle of the forest. With each criticism, a memory of the city haunted me, but I refused to give in. The cabin didn't need to change. They were the ones who didn't belong there. I began to plan. Small strategies emerged in my mind, like seeds cast into the soil of resistance. I didn't know how yet, but I would reclaim what was mine. Alone if necessary. You don't have a TV? No heating. It wasn't long before I scheduled a meeting with Craig, my friend and lawyer, at a coffee shop in the neighboring town. He listened to me carefully, without interrupting, as he always did back when we worked together. After my account, he shook his head seriously. He explained that legally there was no formal obligation to host them, but there was also no document that shielded the property from this type of emotional invasion. The property was in my name but unprotected. Craig was direct. You need a plan. And soon. He said he had dealt with cases like this, where emotional manipulation opened more dangerous doors than a false key. That gave me chills. He gave me initial guidance, spoke of legal possibilities, but also warned me. The situation would require strategy, patience, and great firmness. I was ready for it. I returned to the cabin with a sharper gaze. Now every gesture from Walter, every comment from Mabel, took on another dimension. I started noting habits, phrases, reactions. I was no longer just an uncomfortable hostess. I was a woman on high alert. The cabin was not just my refuge. It was my stronghold, and I would not allow it to be taken without resistance. So you need a plan. And soon. It was time to act, but intelligently. I started with small adjustments to the environment, nothing that could be directly pointed out, but enough to cause discomfort. I added bitter herbs to the cistern filter, which gave the water a strong mineral taste. I scattered some dried snakeskins in the corners of the porch, clearly visible at dusk. And at night, I left the radio tuned to low frequencies in the shed, emitting subtle sounds that echoed through the trees like animal laments. Mabel was the first to react. She complained about the water, saying she felt her mouth numb after drinking tea. Walter began to avoid going to the shed alone, saying the sounds made him nervous. I just smiled, offering more tea, more silence, more nature. They didn't know it, but the forest was on my side, and I would use it. It wasn't violence, it was survival. It was my peace being defended with weapons that only those who know the countryside can wield. The nights became long for them. The sounds of owls, raccoons, and other nocturnal animals seemed amplified. I, accustomed to it, slept peacefully. Mabel did not. Her dark circles grew, and she dozed off during the day, startling at any creak. Walter, irritated, slammed doors and talked to himself. They were out of their habitat, and the cabin silently was expelling them. Gradually, the discomfort turned into silent despair. This is no place for city folk. On a particularly cold night, I heard Mabel sobbing in the bedroom. I approached the door and listened as she murmured about voices and footsteps outside. It was just a raccoon rummaging through the firewood, as it always did. But in her tired mind, everything took on supernatural proportions. The next day she barely spoke, pacing back and forth with crossed arms and restless eyes. Walter commented that she was on edge. He wasn't sleeping well either. He said he dreamed of shadows and that the mattress was too hard. He tried to blame the altitude, the climate, the food, but everything was exactly as it had always been. I just listened, feigning concern, but inwardly I calculated every reaction. My plan was working, without direct confrontations, just with nature doing its work. The forest knew who belonged to it. In the afternoon, Mabel asked to turn on all the lights in the house. She said it brought security. I agreed, knowing that the intense light would only increase their feeling of disconnection from the surroundings. The natural isolation of the cabin, once beautiful, now became a threat to them. And that's what I wanted. For them to realize that this place was not theirs and never would be. Resistance didn't have to be loud, just had to be constant. I think we're getting sick here. When Ethan showed up, I thought it would be another test of patience. He got out of the car looking around, frowning at the fog and sudden cold that had taken over the morning. He entered with that authoritative air disguised as sympathy and hugged his parents, who tried to smile but were visibly shaken. I noticed how Mabel squeezed his arm tighter than necessary. Walter avoided my gaze. Ethan noticed the discomfort in the air. He sat with me on the porch and asked if everything was all right. I smiled, as one who appreciates the gentle breeze, and replied that yes, everything was flowing as it should. He commented that his parents were restless, that it wasn't what they imagined. I kept smiling, letting the silence answer for me. I didn't need to justify what nature already said so well. They were not welcome. He went around in circles, trying to understand what had changed. He said he expected more gratitude, that it was a gesture of trust to leave them with me. That made me laugh inside. A gesture of trust? Or a poorly disguised trap? He didn't realize that the more he pushed, the stronger I became. And there, in that wooden chair, I was much bigger than any of his plans. Strange. I thought they would love the fresh air. I was cleaning the main living area, reorganizing the coats hanging behind the door, when something fell to the floor with a dull thud. It was a dark synthetic leather folder, too heavy to be just ordinary papers. As I opened it, my stomach churned. Inside, there were documents with legal letterheads, draft signatures, and a detached sheet with my name, followed by a blank field for a signature. Property transfer. I sat on the sofa with the folder in my lap, feeling a flush rise to my face, a mix of anger and disbelief. The papers clearly indicated that if I signed, everything would automatically pass into Amanda's name. But the legal wording left dangerous loopholes. It was the kind of document that someone could easily manipulate, especially if the person involved was led to sign without reading carefully. My fingers trembled, but not from fear, rather from the cold fury that engulfed me. There were oily fingerprints on the edges, as if Walter had handled it more than once in secret. And then I understood. This visit was not a favor. It was an operation. Ethan didn't just want to inconvenience me. He wanted the cabin, the land, my silence. I slowly got up, the folder firm in my hands, and went to my room. There, under the blue blanket I had embroidered years ago, I made the vow that would change everything. This can't be true. The next morning, I met Craig and handed him the documents. He read in silence, his eyes narrowing with each line. When he finished, he stated clearly, this was an attempted property fraud. Ethan was trying to advance his own inheritance, possibly to protect assets from creditors. It was a desperate and dangerous move. Craig took a deep breath and spoke with the calm of someone who knows this game. If you sign, it's irreversible. I felt the ground give way for a moment. The betrayal came not only from Ethan, but perhaps from Amanda as well. How could my daughter allow something like this? Craig was categorical. We needed to act fast but discreetly. The folder would be kept as evidence. From that moment on, everything would be documented, recorded, protected. I was no longer alone, and now I had an experienced and determined lawyer by my side. He suggested I not confront Ethan yet. Whoever tries to take without warning doesn't deserve a warning back, he said. I agreed. A game was underway, and for the first time I understood its rules. It wasn't enough to feel like the owner of the cabin. It was necessary to defend it with all the weapons of reason, law, and courage. And I was ready for it. Every detail would matter. But if you sign, it's irreversible. That night I called Amanda to talk. I showed her the folder, its contents, and watched her every reaction carefully. Her eyes widened, her mouth agape, denying even before words. She said she knew nothing, that Ethan had never mentioned this to her. But something in her gaze broke. She didn't confront me, didn't try to shift the blame. She remained silent, like someone beginning to piece together a long-ignored puzzle. I spoke little, just enough. I said I expected, at the very least, vigilance from her, and that if anything else happened to me, she would know she was an accomplice by omission. Amanda left the room with heavy steps. I saw her hesitate at the door, then move forward, carrying the weight of a doubt she might never have allowed herself to face. Was it the beginning of a change? I didn't know. But there were cracks in their sandcastle. The next day, Amanda barely spoke to Ethan. I watched from afar, noticing the glances that were once blind and now began to see. It was subtle but real. She was beginning to doubt. And when doubt sets in, it digs deep until it finds the truth. It was only a matter of time before she discovered what he was really hiding. I need to think about everything he hid from me. Amanda called saying she needed to talk in person. When she arrived, her red eyes and devastated expression said it all even before the first word. We sat on the porch and she, with a choked voice, told me about her argument with Ethan. She said she confronted him about the documents, demanded explanations. He exploded, yelled, accused her of being ungrateful and weak. There was no possible dialogue. Only shouting. Only denial. She insisted until he revealed the real reason behind the rush. Debts with loan sharks, loans in her name, overdue bills, and increasingly imminent threats. Amanda cried like a wounded child, not just from fear but from shame. She said she had trusted him too much, believed in his plans, ignored the signs. My heart was breaking, but I couldn't let her fall. I needed her strong now. She said he signed things for her, hid letters, and lied about amounts. She discovered calls with dangerous men and encrypted messages on his phone. Everything led to the same conclusion. He had sunk himself and wanted to drag everyone else down with him. Amanda trembled with anger and fear, as if everything she knew had suddenly crumbled. And in a way, yes, it had crumbled. But perhaps that was exactly what she needed to awaken. He betrayed me in every sense. Amanda stayed at the cabin that night. She sat with me in the living room, wrapped in a thick blanket, her hands clutching a cup that was cooling too fast. She said she couldn't live with him anymore. That she couldn't sleep next to someone who used her as a shield and guarantee. She asked if I would help her, if Craig could represent her in the divorce. My answer was a long, firm hug. It was time to rebuild. The next day we went to Craig's office together. Amanda told him everything. Documents, debts, manipulations. Craig listened calmly and firmly. He said the path wouldn't be easy, but there was enough evidence and precedent for a protected separation. For the first time, I saw Amanda straighten her shoulders like someone wearing armor. She was determined. There was no more hesitation in her gaze. I began to see her with different eyes. Not as my fragile daughter, but as a woman who, even belatedly, chose her own dignity. With every word of hers, I felt that we were more united. By pain, yes, but also by truth. And truth, when accepted, gives us strength. Ethan had crossed all boundaries, and now he would face two women he never imagined seeing side by side. I want him to pay for everything. Ethan's response was not long in coming. 2 days later, I received a court notification. He was petitioning for my interdiction. claiming that I no longer had the mental capacity to live alone. He accused me of confusion, paranoia, hostile behavior. He alleged that I needed constant supervision, and that the cabin being remote exacerbated my clinical condition. It was a desperate attempt to reverse the game, and I knew it. Amanda was furious, but Craig calmed her down. He said this move was predictable, that now was the time to gather evidence, reports, and act with precision. The battle was far from over, but now we had clarity. Ethan was cornered and willing to do anything. This made him dangerous but also predictable. I needed to stay strong. Not just for myself, but for Amanda, for my story, for every elder who has ever been silenced this way. Let's see if she's really in the mental condition to live alone. Craig arranged all the medical and psychological evaluations in record time. I was seen by a neutral and impartial team who listened, tested, and evaluated me. I answered everything with clarity and serenity. After all, I had nothing to hide. During the conversations, I found myself remembering patients I had once defended against abuse, and now I was in their shoes. But I felt no shame. I felt determination. When Shannon Price arrived at the cabin, her presence was comforting. She was the social worker assigned for the final analysis. Young, discreet, but with attentive eyes. She walked through the house, observed interactions, asked questions that went beyond the obvious. We talked at length. In the end, she closed her notebook and said, "You are more centered than many young people I have interviewed." I smiled with a mix of pride and relief. Shannon's visit was a turning point. She saw what was there. Not a lonely, confused old woman, but a lucid woman fighting for her dignity. I knew her report would make a difference, and for the first time I felt the system was on my side. Not out of charity, but out of recognition. My sanity didn't need to be proven, but now it was officially recorded. She is more centered than many young people. Craig gathered the reports, evaluations, and videos of the visit. He filed everything in court with the firmness of someone who knows their ground. The following days were silent until the decision arrived. The interdiction request was dismissed. No room for immediate appeal. Ethan had lost the first battle, and this victory had a special taste. Not just for justice, but for being won with lucidity and patience. Amanda hugged me when she heard the decision. She said she was ashamed for having doubted me, even in silence. I said the most important thing was that she was here now, with me. The victory was ours. Craig congratulated us but emphasized, there was still more to face. Ethan wouldn't give up so easily. But now we were ready. And we had evidence. The game had changed. With the request dismissed, everything started to fall into place. The cabin began to breathe again. The air seemed cleaner, lighter. I knew new threats would come, but that moment was mine. A symbol. A declaration. I was not weak. And I would never be disposable. Ethan lost the first battle. Justice was swift. In less than a week, Ethan received official notification. He would be investigated for attempted fraud and improper use of documents. The papers I found, combined with Amanda's statements, formed a robust dossier. The law, which sometimes seems distant, was now present in our defense. Ethan, once arrogant, was now just a name in a heavy legal process. Craig showed me the contents of the notification, his eyes calm but firm. He knew we would still face more. But that step was essential. Ethan was no longer in control. Amanda, in turn, decided to move with the girls to a smaller house, near the cabin. A new phase was beginning, and with it, the certainty that we were no longer alone. I sat on the porch that night, watching the cloudless sky. The silence seemed to thank me for defending it. The forest, which once welcomed my new beginning, now witnessed my resistance. And inside me a whisper echoed, "No one will silence me again, nor steal what is mine. Never again. You dug your own grave, Ethan." Craig was direct. We needed to make the property legally impenetrable. He explained the concept of an irrevocable trust, a legal structure that would prevent any future attempt at asset invasion. I agreed without hesitation. Amanda was named beneficiary, and all clauses were carefully drafted to protect my lifelong autonomy. As I signed, I felt as if I was putting an invisible wall between myself and the past. It was more than just a piece of paper. It was an act of reclamation. Craig registered the document, and the cabin became protected by a solid, almost impenetrable legal network. Ethan could try whatever he wanted. There were no loopholes left. Amanda moved, promised she would never allow anyone to cross this new boundary. Now we were two guardians of the same story. I returned home and looked around with new eyes. For the first time, I felt that the land beneath my feet was truly mine. Not just by right but by protection. The cabin welcomed me back with the comfortable silence I loved so much. The past still echoed, but now it no longer threatened me. It was part of the road, not the destination. Now he won't touch it anymore. Never. A few days later, Patrick Moore appeared at the gate with a grave expression. Our neighbor, a former police officer, had always been discreet, so his presence there was already a warning sign. He said he noticed two men walking on the trail north of the property, well before dawn. They were strangers wearing low-brimmed caps. They were circling, observing as if measuring time and distance. Patrick didn't confront them but followed at a distance until they retreated and disappeared down the dirt road. He said their behavior wasn't that of someone lost, it was that of someone observing, calculating. That same night I reinforced all the locks and left the porch lights on. My instinct told me this wasn't random. Ethan was desperate, and desperate men make dangerous choices. I informed Craig, who recommended immediate registration at the police station. We also discussed installing discrete cameras in the cabin's blind spots. Amanda agreed. The cabin had become an indirect target, not for what was inside but for what it represented. A symbol of resistance, of breaking a cycle of abuse and silence. And symbols bother those who live by control. They were scouting, looking for an entry. The next dawn, I heard hurried footsteps on the dry leaves near the shed. I picked up the phone with steady hands and called the local police, reporting the full history. The patrol car arrived quickly. They scoured the area, found recent footprints but nothing conclusive. Still, it was enough for an alert to be issued. Ethan was being watched now, not by me but by the law. Patrick later confirmed that two men retreated when they saw the red lights of the patrol car coming up the hill. Craig called later with a decisive piece of information. Ethan had received judicial notices for high debts, with a risk of asset seizure. He was out of options. The cabin was the last piece of his puzzle, and now off the board. Only collapse remained. I knew he would try one last gambit. And I also knew we were ready. Amanda, Craig, Patrick. Each was a part of the wall that now protected me. And the foundation of that wall was made of choices. Of not silencing, of not yielding, of not accepting what had always been considered inevitable. Either he gives in or he goes to jail. The day dawned strangely, as if the wind knew what was coming. Ethan appeared alone, dejected. His shoulders slumped as if carrying his own failure. There was no more arrogance, no lengthy justifications. He sat before Craig with deep-set eyes and a low voice. Craig presented the agreement. Total renunciation of the property, no future contestation, and acceptance of full responsibility for the debts. Ethan didn't even try to negotiate. He signed with a trembling hand, almost without reading. He was an emptied man. He only said, "I accept. I just want to end this." Amanda was not present by choice. She didn't want to see that end unfold before the girl's eyes. Craig filed everything right there. It was official. The threat had ended, but the emotional damage still needed time to heal. When he stood up, he cast a last glance at the cabin's porch. I remained silent, watching without blinking. There was nothing more to say. He turned his back and walked down the trail alone, not even looking at the car. For the first time, he didn't try to control anything. He just left. And perhaps in that gesture, there was a late glimmer of shame. But that was no longer for me to interpret. I accept. I just want to end this. Amanda appeared in the afternoon with the girls. She brought the divorce papers already signed. She said she didn't want any more conversations with Ethan. Just the legal end of everything. Craig would handle the final part. The girls ran around the yard, laughing, not understanding what had changed, but feeling the lightness around them. Amanda and I looked at each other in silence, understanding that this moment was the beginning of a new era. She said she would rent a small house nearby, and that she wanted to rebuild her life with simplicity and truth. I supported her. I knew our relationship would be different from then on. More mature. More honest. She was rediscovering herself, just as I had rediscovered my strengths. It was beautiful to see that reflection between us. Something was healing in that silence between mother and daughter. As we said goodbye, Amanda hugged me tightly. The girls waved from the car window, and I felt a deep emotion wash over me. It wasn't sadness nor longing. It was gratitude for still being here, for having resisted, for seeing those two little ones grow up in a fairer world, with stronger women around them. He didn't look back. That night I walked through the cabin alone. I touched the walls, closed the windows calmly, and put the kettle on for tea. The fireplace light danced on the walls, and the sound of the wind was once again a melody, not a threat. I sat in the rocking chair and took a deep breath. For the first time in a long time there was no apprehension, no tension. Only presence. Only peace. I closed my eyes and heard my heart beat slowly. The cabin was silent. But it wasn't an empty silence, it was full. Loaded with history, with choices, with courage. I had won not only a legal battle but something greater. The war against the erasure of my own voice. And now that voice echoed firmly within me. It was a new beginning. A fresh start without traps, without invaders, without masks. Amanda was free. The girls were protected. And I was whole. For the first time in decades. Whole. Now let's start over. Amanda found a simple wooden house, with wide windows and a porch facing an abandoned orchard. It was just 10 minutes from my cabin, surrounded by trees and silence, but close enough for us to feel like family. The girls loved the space, ran around the yard, explored the trails as if rediscovering the world. I saw Amanda hang curtains, plant herbs, and smile with a sparkle I hadn't seen in years. They were starting over, and this time without fear. We created new habits almost without realizing it. Coffee together on Sunday mornings, afternoons of outdoor reading, walks to pick wildflowers. Kelly and June quickly got used to the new rhythm, exchanging tablets for colorful stones, stories, and childish inventions. Amanda wrote by hand, something she hadn't done since adolescence. I watched from afar, my heart warmed by seeing my daughter flourish. The past didn't disappear, but now there was room for healing. Sometimes I found myself remembering the city, the old routine, the cold walls of hospitals. And then I would return to the present, to the grass beneath my feet, to the smell of cake coming from the house next door. Everything was simpler and therefore truer. Amanda said she had learned to live again. And I learned with her every day. Even after 60, we discovered that roots can sprout again. The girls ran free among the trees. I began to tend the garden like someone caring for a book written with flowers. I chose the plants with intention. Lavender to soothe, rosemary to strengthen, sunflowers to remind me of light. I started reading under the oak tree in silence like a ritual. One day I received a letter from an elderly woman from another state, who had read an article about my story, and felt encouraged to say no to her own son. Soon came other letters, other voices. Women of different ages and stories but united by a silent pain. The fear of losing what is theirs, of being forgotten, of being used. I read every word with the care of one receiving secrets. I responded to all, even if with few lines. It wasn't just my struggle. It was a mirror for so many. I realized that my story had become something bigger than myself, something that touched and awakened. I started writing excerpts from the letters in a notebook, interspersed with my own reflections. Not as an outburst but as a legacy. The life I had left would not only be contemplative, it would be useful. Amanda suggested I publish something one day. Perhaps. But for now it was enough to know that I was no longer invisible. That my voice, however gentle, had echoed far. I didn't know my example would touch so many people. It was on a calm afternoon while I was picking mint that I received the phone call. It was a representative from a National Institute on Aging and Civil Rights. She said she had heard about my story through one of the letters published by a local newspaper. She invited me to a conference on elder property protection, on behalf of a new awareness program. My first reaction was to recoil. Speak in public? Me? But something stirred within me. An old memory of when I taught young nurses, of when my voice guided with firmness and compassion. I was not the same woman as before, and precisely because of that perhaps I had more to offer. I accepted. Amanda helped me prepare everything. Craig reviewed the legal information I would share. I was scared, yes. But above that, I felt it was time. I went back to the porch, looked at the garden, took a deep breath. The cabin had been my refuge. Now it could be my starting point. The road of life did not close with age. It just took deeper paths. If my story could prevent others from being silenced, then it was my duty to tell it. With truth. With courage. This time my voice will be heard. When I stepped onto the stage, my hands trembled. But simply seeing the attentive faces in front of me, I felt a wave of courage rise within my chest. I spoke of the beginning, of the fatigue, the cabin, the bitter surprise of the invasion. I told of the fear, the manipulation, the loneliness. But I also spoke of resistance, of awakening, of strategy, and above all of the love that made me not give up on myself. Every word seemed to open a door. I saw people cry, nod in agreement, take avid notes. There weren't just elderly people in the audience. There were children, grandchildren, health and legal professionals. When I finished, there was silence. A reverent silence, followed by applause that didn't seem to stop. I was moved, not out of vanity, but by realizing that my pain had transformed into shared strength. I was surrounded by questions, hugs, stories. One woman said she would go home with the courage to change her life. A young man thanked me for helping him understand what his grandmother was going through. A lawyer asked for my authorization to include my speech in a family law course. Amanda was waiting for me backstage with teary eyes. We didn't need to say anything. She knew. Every elder deserves to be respected and heard. The following days were intense. I received invitations for other lectures, interviews, projects. I discovered that there was a growing network of women like me, willing to rise up and support each other. It was as if at last I had found my new role in the world, no longer as a caregiver, but as an active voice, a guide. It was a mission, not chosen but embraced with honor. Gradually, the letters turned into meetings, the meetings into initiatives. We created a small local group of mature women, with the aim of discussing legal protection, emotional health, and effective bonds. The group grew every week, like seeds scattered by the mountain wind. Patrick lent us the shed for our meetings. Amanda helped with coffee, the girls took care of the flowers. It was a new cycle full. I felt whole. Not for having won but for having transformed. The pain that silenced me now propelled me. And with every face I saw light up with hope, something in me healed too. It wasn't about the past. It was about the present we chose to create, with firmness, with voice, with roots. It wasn't the end of the road. It was the beginning. On the night of my return, Amanda was waiting for me with a special dinner. Kelly and June had drawn pictures with the phrase, "Grandma is our hero." We laughed, toasted with apple juice, and shared stories by the fireplace. The smell of bread in the oven, the sound of laughter, the glow of the candles. Everything composed a scene I never would have imagined in those dark days. It was like being reborn in life. After everyone was asleep, I went out onto the porch. The night was cold, but the sky was clear, full of stars. I took a deep breath and let the silence envelop me. But this time it didn't feel empty. It was full of voices, memories, and achievements. It was the kind of silence that embraces, that soothes. I sat in the rocking chair, wrapped in a blanket, and let time pass. The cabin, my silent companion, seemed to smile with me. Everything was as it should be. Every battle, every choice had brought me there. And there I would stay. Not as a hostage, but as the mistress of myself. A whole woman, at peace with what she had built. Ready for whatever comes. With the mountain as my witness. That night I slept with a light heart. And the silence never felt so welcoming. Now, I'm curious about you who heard my story. What would you do if you were in my shoes? Have you experienced anything similar? Support the channel by subscribing, liking, commenting, and sharing this video. I'm leaving another story on the end screen that you'll also enjoy, and it will definitely surprise you. Thank you for watching. See you in the next video.